My name is László Andor. I'm the Secretary General for FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, and we are very proud to be in Vienna today as guests of the Renner-Institut, which is our long-standing partner. FEPS is a foundation located in Brussels. It's the think tank of the European Social Democratic political family, and we have many joint projects with Renner-Institut in on various topics, and the event today is also a product of this great cooperation, for which we are absolutely grateful. On the other hand, I would also like to stress that today's program is not simply improvised in response to the current war in Ukraine. It has been also planned for some time, because with Renner-Institut plus a few other European foundations, which also belong to the progressive political family, we have been running a project to discuss, to analyze, to investigate EU-Russia relations, the past, the present, and the future of this. And now, of course, under the impression, I can even say under the shock of the recent developments, we will look at these relations differently than in the previous 2 years. Nevertheless, we value immensely the work of experts who contributed to this project and today's discussion in Vienna with their papers. So we have been discussing various aspects of the war, but also in more general terms, European security and Eastern strategy during this day, in which esteemed experts, academic but also political ones, participated, representing our members, FMS, Max van der Stoel Foundation from the Netherlands, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung from Germany, Fondazione Gramsci from Italy, Fondation Jean Jaurès from France, and Amicus Europa from Poland. So a great diversity of institutions have been represented in this discussion. We had to acknowledge that the war of Russia against Ukraine was unexpected to many, and it is indeed a shock even for those who counted with this as a possible scenario. For us in the progressive family, there can be no ambiguity about calling Russia an aggressor and Ukraine the victim. The European nations and institutions have extended solidarity with Ukraine and the people of Ukraine, whether they stayed in the country to defend it or they emigrated. And this wave of emigration, as you know, is unprecedented in European history. The people of Ukraine will continue to need European support. We believe that EU nations are committed to provide maximum support to Ukrainians. At the same time, of course, we have to be mindful about the risk of escalation of the military conflict, and avoiding a World War III, obviously, is also a major concern for everyone. We should not underestimate the difficulty of this political balancing act between the different objectives. Humanitarian support on the one hand, financial, if necessary, military aid, but on the other hand, ensuring that Eastern Europe, or Europe as a whole, can establish peace as soon as it is possible. Now, of course, the various stages of this process cannot be predicted at this moment. And our experts, the participants of the discussion today, of course, had a very difficult job to analyze, for example, the rollout of sanctions and the implications and consequences of those, but also the complete turnaround of European defense and security policy under this shock of the war in Ukraine. And then, of course, various European scenarios can be developed in terms of further enlargement of the European Union, in terms of further enlargement, possibly also of NATO. But not only we have to think in terms of enlargements of specific organizations, but also the deepening of the European integration, especially what concerns the necessary and inevitable security dimension of the European Union, which probably is bound to shift gear in the coming years. So I would not like to pretend to be able to give you a summary of 6-hour discussions in a few minutes. I just wanted to highlight the diversity of questions which inevitably come to the discussion if we start to discuss the war and its possible consequences. Now I would like to invite the participants of the panel to stage. The panel will be moderated by the director of the Karl-Renner-Institut, Maria Malcznik, and the participants will be Professor Agnieszka Bryc, who is from Poland. She's assistant professor at the Faculty of Political Science of Nicolaus Copernicus University. Good evening. Hannes Swoboda, who must be a familiar face in Vienna. He's the president of the International Institute for Peace, but also a former member of the European Parliament, a former leader of the Social Democratic Group in the European Parliament, and the holder of many other important titles. Also, we have with us also ŠTEFAN FÜLE, a former European Commissioner for Enlargement and European Neighbourhood Policy, who is also a former ambassador of his country. He also served as an ambassador to NATO, and I'm sure he will share his experience from those times. And last but not least, we have Reinhard Krumm, director of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation at the Baltic States, currently located in Riga, but previously he worked in Vienna and before that also in Moscow, and he's also teaching at Regensburg University, European history with a focus on Russia. I would like to ask all of them to come on stage, and I will hand over the microphone to Maria Malcznik. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laszlo Andor, for your welcome words and your introduction and the summary of our closed-door sessions that we had today. Thank you to the Foundation for European Progressive Studies and all the project partners for the good cooperation in organizing this event, which was not easy. Like as Laszlo said, this conference has been planned for months and had to be reshuffled completely in the last 2 weeks. A warm welcome also from my side to our guests, to our event, War in Ukraine, Consequences for the EU's Eastern Policy. My name is Maria Malcznik, and I am the director of the Karl-Renner-Institut. A very warm welcome also to our guests who participate in this debate online. We, during the day, we had international participants who, partly because they cannot leave their countries right now, participated online. Laszlo Andor already introduced our distinguished speakers tonight. Our event is live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. both on the Renner-Institut channel and on the FEPS channel. The video will also be available after the event on these channels. Not only who are here in person today at the Renner-Institut, but also those who watch online have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments. We will try to bring them into the discussion. I will receive these questions via messenger services on my mobile phone, so please don't be irritated when I take a look from time to time on my phone. It's not, I'm not being rude, but only being informed of what's happening in the online debate. What are we discussing today? Russia's war of aggression has come as a shock, as Laszlo described it, for all of us. Thousands of people have already lost their lives. More than 2.8 million Ukrainians have fled the country. The EU responded with unprecedented sanctions against Russia and delivers weapons to Ukraine. There's much solidarity with the country and the refugees. The questions we would like to discuss tonight are the following. How do we assess the EU reactions? What steps should the EU take in order to avoid further escalation and to support the Ukrainian people? In which possible ways can a ceasefire and even a peace agreement can be reached? How could the future EU strategy towards Russia and the entire Eastern neighborhood look like? And last but not least, what are the consequences for the European neighborhood policy? In the first round, I would suggest discussing the short-term measures and consequences that need to be taken. And in the second round, we will discuss the mid-term and long-term EU strategy in Eastern Europe and especially towards Russia. I would like to start with you, Agnieszka Bryc. Poland has always warned, you come from Poland, Poland has always warned against Russia's imperialism and aggressiveness. Now, Polish citizens show much solidarity with the refugees from Ukraine. How would you assess the EU's reaction to Russia's invasion in Ukraine? Does the EU show enough solidarity with Ukraine and its people? And what would you expect from the EU if we see further escalation?
Thank you very much. It's a huge privilege to be with you here in Vienna. Thank you very much for invitation. I know that all of us, and especially those who deal with Russian policy, we are just overloaded with the deal, with the task to follow the news from the front, in fact. So that's why I really appreciate such discussions, because this is the first opportunity of to exchange our views, and as we experience today, our views might be different, and that's good, because this is the moment when we might talk about what to do to help Ukraine and to save Europe from further crisis. But what's about Polish attitude? What's about Polish reaction and our reaction and reflection on European stance? So, frankly speaking, when we are talking about how Poland was touched and how we reacted and what we are going to do also in terms of European Eastern policy, I would like to mention, and it was, frankly speaking, even striking me that when the war has started a few days ago, within one night, our line on instability has enlarged from, and here I have numbers, just imagine, from 400 main focus for not only a few months, but I think a few years in relations with NATO, first of all, because we are one of the eastern flank countries, and is going to be our main focus in relations with our Eastern European partners. What's more, this is the second point. Poland has taken more than 1.5 million refugees. I think it really made us surprised, maybe not the government, because government was repeating on and on through last months that we are ready, we are prepared for welcoming a great number of refugees, but I have to admit that our success is not the government success. This is the success of ordinary people, of Poles who organize themselves. They are just traveling at the border and they are collecting refugees and they are taking them to not only to Warsaw and Krakow, but sometimes also to other smaller cities. So we have so this is the problem also. Now we are full of emotions, we are very, we are trying to save them. But what we expect growing problems, tensions, social crisis, because as you should know, in Poland we have maybe not a very numerous, but they are very active far-right societies, very not only conservative but far-right parties, which claim that refugees are a threat and refugees are going to be also a burden for the government and for Polish people. So we are expecting that quite soon we might face such kind of problems. What's more, we are going to be prepared, and I think that is going to be also a further question for our government for deepening energy crisis. So in terms of Europe, our position is not so bad because we are dependent on Russian gas in more or less 50%, and in oil it's worse, it's 60%, but we were working hard, we've been working hard on our diversification. So mentally Poland, as Polish people and Polish government, we are prepared for paying this price. Yeah, we are ready to save our, let's say, security, energetic security. But how we assess European colleagues and the Brussels reaction, I have to admit that, and I would like even to stress it, that our government, which is purely populist and purely conservative, but in that bad way, not in a good way, conservative, but in a bad way. It means our Law and Justice Party, it seems to be, on one hand, in terms of economy, much more socialist party, and in that ideology, identity aspects, our government is much more like European far right parties. So even that government now is obliged to cooperate with Europe, to change their narrative and to mild that very anti-European criticism. So now we are maybe not in a honeymoon with Europe, but our government really has, I think, has realized the real, how to say, the real burden and the real problem, the value of the problem. So even Law and Justice Party is going not to fuel anti-European emotions, not to use very patriotic and very nationalistic slogans. So, but I am afraid that such a position, such a pro-European and readiness to cooperate with Europe is going to end somehow, because next year we are going to have elections, and the problem is that the electorate of our governmental party is mostly consisting of, let's say, skeptics towards European Union. And I think that maybe the rest I will continue in further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnieszka. Reinhard Krumm, Ukraine's leadership is pushing NATO to impose a no-fly zone over the country. But NATO, for the time being, rejects this idea for good reasons in order to avoid being involved in the war. Are there, in your opinion, any thinkable circumstances that could leave the West with no other choice than to intervene also militarily? How do you assess the risk of a large-scale war in Europe? And one additional question, since you are the director of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in the Baltic states, let me also ask how these countries assess the situation at the moment.
Thank you very much also for inviting me. If you don't mind, I just want to, the audience, give you an idea. The FES has about 100 offices worldwide. We have an office in Moscow, and we have an office in Ukraine. The Ukraine office is clearly closed, and the people are trying to get out of the country, which are partly in Poland, they're partly in Riga, they're partly in Berlin and otherwise. So possibly in Vienna. So it's just something which, this conflict is not far away. This is very close. I have a good friend who offered his apartment in Warsaw. So this is nothing far away. And I don't know about you or about the panelists, but this is something which is on your shoulder. Clearly, we're not in Kiev, so it's a different story. But still, it's personal. And to give you another information, just by accident, not completely by accident, actually, I was looking for it. There's an op-ed in the International Herald Tribune from 1994. It's about 30 years. And Timothy Garton-Ash is one of the authors, and he cites Kozyrev, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia. And Kozyrev said in a speech in December, I think, it was the East Central European sovereign decision which community or alliance to join. Western leaders should drop the old bad habit of nervously wondering about how the hawks in Moscow might react. 30 years ago, not that much, and the world has been turning around. Coming to your question, apologies for these two things, just to give you a historical perspective and also how close this war is. I think the main task of NATO, of the US and the EU is to keep up communication, especially in the military, to make sure that the, I think, already very, very nervous Russian military is not doing something stupid. Also make sure that this confrontation is not seen as a NATO attack on the Russian people. And this, of course, can happen. Yesterday, as we all know, the Russian attacked a target very close to the Polish border. If they miss target, then it's the question what Poland and how Poland will react within NATO, clearly. So, quite frankly, Maria, I just don't want to imagine that we have to do something which then will be a full-fledged war between NATO and Russia, because then all the arsenals, weapon arsenals, are open. At the moment, they're not yet. But of course, the more pictures come in from Ukraine, people suffering, there are so many pictures coming in from people with their mobile phones, it's tough. So far, the US president is very cool-headed. I think NATO does the same, and the EU. But I wouldn't hold my breath what will happen if on purpose the Russian side might do something which they hope will provoke us. Having all that said, in the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, a couple of days ago, I would have said, you know, they cope with the situation. They do have a border with Russia. I wouldn't say this anymore. I think the people in these three countries are getting nervous, knowing that the escape route, it's unbelievable that I say this, but you have to look at it. The escape route is difficult because there is the famous Suwalka Gap, and if somebody would close it, then you're trapped, kind of. You have to leave by sea. So, you know.
Can you explain?
It's in the Cold War, we had the Fulda Gap, which was a place where you could disconnect military transport, and that equivalent you have in Lithuania. If the Russians stop communication there in infrastructure, then the Baltics are extremely difficult to defend. That's known for years. This is nothing new. But for the first time, people realize that they might be trapped. I mean, you can go through sea, over the sea, but that might be difficult too. And also to add here a personal note, my father was born in not far from Königsberg at the time, and he fled with whatever he could grab. I never thought that I might be possibly in the same situation. And again, it's not if I have to, it's about the people. So people think about it. This is nothing kind of theoretical. And I think what worked very well with the EU, especially showing solidarity by coming to these countries. The Canadian Prime Minister was there, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the State Secretary of the US was there, the German President, people traveling and making sure that the solidarity is there. And not only that, you know, the three countries are getting better enforcement and so on and so forth. But still, the long, long shadow of the Second World War is coming back to the Baltics. And people do remember, and maybe it's not completely rational, but from the emotional part, it's a very difficult time, I think, to live in the Baltics. This has changed since we see pictures from Kiev, something which, you know, as you said in the introduction, we wouldn't have believed this would happen.
Thank you very much, Reinhard. Hannes Swoboda, on a short-term perspective, the big question is how, as Reinhard already said, how to avoid further escalation, but also how to reach a ceasefire and in the long run a peace settlement that seems so out of reach right now. For the moment, Macron and Scholz have direct contact to Putin, but have not reached anything yet. Israel and Turkey tried to mediate between Moscow and Kiev. A meeting between the two foreign ministers already took place in Antalya. Should and can the EU play a bigger role in mediating in this war? And what about the OSCE and the United Nations, both institutions that have their headquarters here in Vienna? What might the path to a ceasefire look like?
Well, if I would know, I would get the Nobel Peace Prize. But first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, for this possibility to debate very seriously a serious situation we have. And as my colleagues, Agnieszka and Reinhard already said, it's very close. Of course, not as close as for Poland and for the Baltic states, but it comes very close. I still remember when I was born, and I stayed at that time very close to the Slovak border when the Russian troops or the Soviet troops came there to crash the starting revolution in the Czech Republic. We are not as close yet, but Austria can be also a victim of aggression very close to our country. To your question, very often, and I mentioned the Soviet Union, Russia is compared to the Soviet Union. But in some way, it is even worse. Now, I don't want to defend the system of the Soviet Union, but at least there was some rationality in it. There was a Politburo who discussed issues, and we know from the documents that even the Afghanistan war and other wars were discussed, not in the way Mr. Putin discussed this issue with his security people, what we saw in television. So there are no relatively equal, personalities to Putin in that situation. Of course, the other difference is Soviet Empire stabilized itself after the Second World War. There was more or less a very strong intention to keep what they had. And of course, they defended it in their way. If you think about the Hungarian Revolution, what happened in Poland, what happened before in the Czechoslovakia. But there was, at least in Europe, no way and no intention to extend their empire, which was, of course, bigger than Russia today. So Russia, and this is the philosophy of Mr. Putin, is revisionist. He wants to change borders in Europe. It's revanchist. It is, saying we have to take a revenge because you beat us in the past. And as some scientists and writers and economists from Russia say themselves, it's a fascist country. It became a fascist country in the last years because of Putin's policy. So this whole philosophy of recreating a big Russia, of a special kind of racism in relation to Belarus and Ukraine, saying you are our brothers and sisters, but of course you're not equal to us. We decide your future. We decide what you can do, is very different from any rationality. And therefore it is so difficult to come to terms with Russia and to think about what could be the way. In many discussions in the past, in Europe, but also in the US, if you look, a lot of articles of US scientists say, well, give neutrality to Ukraine and maybe, Crimea, and then the rest will be okay. I don't think, even if Ukraine would have declared itself neutral before, that we would have prevented Russian aggression. Because Putin's aggression is changing, as I said, changing borders, bringing back the Ukrainian population, the Ukrainian country at least, into Russia. Not always the population, because what they do now, killing a lot of Ukrainians, forcing them to flee and to leave the country and destroying the country even with all the bombs, is clearly a sign not of a rational approach for dividing Ukraine or whatever. It is really, I feel in some way, what the Germans called a total war. This is happening now, and to stop a total war, a war run by a totalitarian system, is very, very difficult to come. Nevertheless, of course, we need partners in European Union who could help to come to a ceasefire. The European Union cannot be both on the side of Ukraine and the mediator. We have decided, and I think we have decided rightly, to be on the side of Ukraine. But of course, what we try to do is still to speak with China, with Turkey, with Israel, people who are outside this confrontation, who may have some influence. And of course, in the dialogue also with the European Union. So at the end of the day, I think we should support Mr. Zelensky, and if he is ready to certain steps, because he wants to save life, because he wants to save a minimum of peace in the country and a minimum of non-destruction of the country. This is the thing the European Union can do and should do, with all the elements we have mentioned, with the sanctions on the one hand, with positive support of Ukraine on the other side, and at the same time try to involve third parties to try to have some influence on Russia, because neither China nor Turkey nor Israel is very happy about what is happening, but they are not yet strong enough to block Putin. But again, this is the only thing European Union can do. It is must strongly support Ukraine, whatever we can, however we can do, in order, without, of course, endangering Third World War. And on the other hand, try to find colleagues or friends or partners outside European Union who could have some influence on Russia for a ceasefire. I don't want to speak about peace. For the moment, there is no peace possible with this kind of Russia, but at least maybe let's have a ceasefire where we can minimize the killings, because already in the Donbass and Luhansk area, even when there was ceasefire, there were many killings every day. But at least it was not a total destruction of the country.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stefan Füle, of course, feel free also to react to what has been already said, but since you were EU Commissioner for Enlargement and European Neighbourhood Policy, I would like to ask you how you see, because this is also a short-term question, how you see Ukraine's request for EU membership very quickly under a fast-track procedure. The EU leaders in Versailles last week did not fulfill this wish and transmitted the membership request to the Commission. What do you think? Would it make any difference in the current situation if the EU accepted sort of a fast-track membership?
Thank you very much. And Reinhard already started to referring to a quote from 1994, Kozyrev. Let me offer you another quote, because sometimes we are accused by the Moscow propaganda that from the very beginning we're plotting against their interest and behind their back. So let me read the following quote. If Ukraine wants to join the European Union, and if the EU accepts Ukraine as a member, Russia, I think, would welcome this because we have a special relationship with Ukraine. There is addition to the hope, to this quote, and it reads, I hope it will have a positive impact on Russia economy. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, December 2004. You could still find it on a Kremlin webpage. Okay, so we were quite transparent about our policy towards our eastern partners, including Ukraine. What you referred to was an important and brave step from the struggling Ukrainians. Ukraine is an association partner of the European Union. We have a serious treaty signed in 2014. We have also one of the founding document, Lisbon Treaty, which says very clearly in Article 49 that any European country could apply for the membership if it associates and promotes the values the European Union is based on. The association treaty has already transformed Ukraine to a large extent, and I'm sure it will be one of those things the eventual enlargement process could actually refer to. But I think the most important things has already happened last week during the European Council meeting in Versailles, because it was for the first time when the European Union member states made it very clear that the Ukrainian aspirations to join the European Union are being shared also with the European Union. And they already before that started the whole enlargement process, because it starts with the European Commission to give its advice. You know, we don't have a fast-track European Union, so we don't have a fast-track procedure. And I'm sure that the colleagues in the European Union will take not only on one side the request from the Ukraine very seriously, but at the same time will make sure that at the end of this process, the Ukrainian is not half ready for half fulfillment of obligation to the European Union, that would join the European as a full-fledged member. But what I think is important at this point of the time, and let me underline it once again, to send the message to the brave Ukrainians defending the sovereignty and independence of their country and free choice they should have in choosing their own sort of economic, political, security, friendship and coalitions, that they have been sent last week a very clear message that you're fighting not only for the future of your country, but also for the European future of your country.
Thank you very much. We might come back to the matter of enlargement and Eastern Partnership when we discuss the medium and long-term medium and long-term consequences. Agnieszka, back to you. Your research in the past also focused on the post-Cold War world order and how Russia wants to reshape it. The war in Ukraine is a turning point in European history and for the geopolitical situation and the debate. How would you describe the emerging world order? How do you think the geopolitical situation will shift, and what role do you see for the EU?
Yeah, this is, you know, sometimes when we observe Russia-Ukraine war, we think it's not our war. This is bilateral problem of Ukraine, and we should just help Ukraine to survive. But the stake is absolutely fundamental, because how it ends, it will define our world order. Because not only because of China following the news from Europe or European capital cities and our decisions, because China would like to solve some problems, for example, with Taiwan, in a similar way like Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. But the problem for us is that Ukraine seems to be a fundamental moment for our international order, in that sense that you know, that, as you mentioned, Russia is a revisionist country. Russia would like to change, would like also to take the revenge on Ukraine, because Ukraine several times was, let's say, humiliating Russian special offer. And President Putin was feeling offended by Orange Revolution, then by Dignity Revolution, and now decided that this is that moment when if Ukraine will be not with us, will be with no one. It will be destroyed. Yes. So and now it's our role to prove that international order should be based on values. Democratic values, human rights values, and liberal values, and we should prove, not demonstrate, but we should prove that we still that all these values still matter for us. So this is really the crucial moment for our not only the future of international order and Western leadership in global perspective, but once we allow Russia and countries like Russia to wage offensive wars, to break international law, to take the neighboring territories without punishment, we must be ready. We must be prepared that Russia will be not the last one, and we must be prepared that Russia will go further very soon. Because now it's Ukraine, and tomorrow might be really once again Georgia, then might be Moldova, then who knows what President Putin might conclude. Because here we mentioned that who knows what will happen maybe in a few days' time when we might have a rocket attack, but not within Ukraine borders, but this attack might cross also Polish border, and then immediately 5 minutes later, Moscow will be sending us a message that I'm sorry, we were not intending to violate your NATO members' integrity. So yes, and it would be fundamental moment also for Moscow, because for Moscow might test us how being attacked, in fact, we as a NATO alliance, how we might react. So once we give up, it would be a signal and a proof for authoritarian countries that they might do what they want. So that's why, for me, this is really the most important moment, and it's up to our reaction. It's up to our deterrence of Russia. This is the last moment we might defend our, let's say, international order based on international law and human rights and democracy. So for me, this is really the last warning call what is happening in Ukraine.
Hannes Swoboda, when we take a look at the European Union, there might be a stronger European Union when it comes to security and defense. Under the impression of Russia's invasion in Ukraine, the EU is taking further steps in this regard. After the EU summit in Versailles last Friday, Charles Michel, President of the European Council, announced the Europe of Defense was born this weekend. Is this realistic, or how do you assess these announcements and developments?
Well, I've heard very often in the last years the European of Defense has been born, and the child didn't come alive into this world. One should be honest. Very often, this is the same with the enlargement question. One should be honest to the people, not promise things which cannot happen. Of course, we need more coordinated defense policy of the European Union. Some small steps have been done, but many steps have not been done. If I think about the Rapid Reaction Force and some battle groups and so on, which have not been established. And I think for us all, it is very, very important that we think more about defense, but think also about the closer cooperation between European Union and NATO. European Union cannot copy NATO, not only because we have neutral members or non-aligned members, whatever you would call it, like also Austria, but because when we want to include Ukraine, Moldova, which declared itself already as a neutral country, and other countries, if we want to extend EU, and I think it is important to extend EU now, of course with certain steps, to be done. Then we need a defense union, but not a military alliance, because the military alliance is NATO. And inside the military alliance, of course, you can think about stronger cooperation of the European Union members of this alliance. What we need, for example, is more coordination in procurement. Very often we have incompatibility between different armament decisions in different countries. And I always wonder, even with NATO, why there is no stronger cooperation and coordination in the procurement systems of the different NATO members. But this could also be done in Europe. So yes, let's take very concrete, realistic steps where we can coordinate strongly, where we can have a better division of labor between different member countries concerning their defense. Let's strongly cooperate on the question of cyber defense, because cyber defense and cyber attacks are even a very strong arm used by Russia, especially in the past already. And it was very difficult to elaborate a common position and common activities. Secret services, how difficult it is that the secret services of different countries are cooperating. Everybody is looking, we don't share our information. So there are so many steps to be taken now, and I hope they are taken, because we need a stronger defense cooperation in the European Union. But let's do it and not only talk about it as it was in the past years.
Thank you very much. Stefan FÜLE, talking about, because Hannes also said we need an extension of the EU, and giving the current and expected future developments, how should the EU adapt its neighborhood policy and its strategy towards the other countries in Eastern Europe, not only Ukraine, but also Moldova and the Caucasian states? Should it offer membership perspective to these countries if they seek it? Is the Eastern Partnership approach still appropriate? And we also have a question by Klaus Prömpers that fits in this complex. We still hear Macron saying more accessions only after the EU has reformed, if there are the deeper reforms. Do you think this is still valid?
Look, the Eastern Partnership has been launched during the Czech presidency of the European Union in 2009, a long time ago. And it has been launched not as a kind of, what we expect from our partners, but it was rather a reaction to their aspirations and expectations from having a closer relationship with the European Union. In the bulk of the Eastern Partnership was to help those countries with the reforms, strengthening the democratic institutions, rule of law, fight against corruption, building a strong civil society, and you could go on like this. In 2011, what we have done in the college was reviewing this Eastern Partnership and saying very clearly, if we will stick to your aspirations, meaning if some of you would like to go in the direction of partnership, it's fine with us, and we will definitely find a number of the programs to support you along those way. But we also made it very clear for the first time that those of our Eastern partners would like to go deeper in relationship with the European Union, that we can imagine that at a certain stage that they would reach out the Article 49 and would eventually apply for the European Union membership. And it happened 2011, and by the way, the document was published as all others. We have 6 partners in the Eastern Partnership. We had a quite minimalistic cooperation with Belarus on the bilateral basis, although on multilateral basis they were part of the Eastern Partnership. We have the association agreement and a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement with 3 countries, with Moldova, Georgia and Ukraine. This is a complicated name, but what you should imagine behind this association agreement, it's actually extremely complex document having 1,000 of pages, which in various EU policies is offering those 3 partners along the speed they choose themselves to align with the European Union policies. It means building more of Europe in those countries, again, based not necessarily what we want them to do, but what they expect from us to help them. We negotiating the association agreement with Armenia, but at a certain time they changed their mind and they went into the customs union. By the way, that shows also a different nature, how we sort of are treating the neighborhood compared to Russia. Because when the Armenians foreign minister told me, and I was at that time in the college, that you know, for this and that reasons they are joining the customs union rather than continuing the association agreement. By the way, and I'll come back to that. We said that's okay. But we, of course, are sorry because we spent so many years negotiating and we have a high expectation, but we respect your decision. And we have agreed that after a certain reflection from them to know what kind of obligations would be stemming from the customs union, we could come back to the negotiating table and we could have a specific partnership agreement with Armenia, which would respect their new obligations. While the Russians, when they realized that we were actually rather close to conclude the negotiation with Moldova, Georgia and Ukraine, they started to threaten those partners. They started to boycott the products. They boycott the border points between Russia and Ukraine. It was a completely different reaction. I remember also in Moscow, that was the last time the European Commission had a meeting with the Russian government. It was a good, I think, opportunity every 2 years to have such a direct contacts with Russia. No other country, by the way, no other partner had this privilege. And at that time, it was March 2013, we told the Russians, listen, I was Medvedev sitting as a prime minister, Lavrov was there, and representing the commission there, I told them, point number 1, the association agreement is not compatible with our Eastern partners' membership in customs union. Let us to be very clear, we told them. I try to explain this is not because of some political games, it's because of the legal conditions. Because there are a number of the obligations stemming from the association agreement. Your custom union has been built in such a way that most of the external economic policies responsibilities were transferred to the this customs union commission in Moscow. So we told them we cannot sort of negotiate it with Ukraine, for example, the association agreement, and then to be told by the Ukrainians, and when it comes to the implementation, go to Moscow, because they sort of decide on our own behalf. So that's what we said as a point number one. Point number two, we said, listen, despite what we have just said, we are very much interested, our partners, to retain and strengthen sometimes very special relationship with Russia, based on the culture, historical language, sort of closeness, traditions, and so on. And we went we went far enough to tell the Russian government that if our partners want to be a part of a specific customs union policy, we would be ready and willing to look at the responsibilities stemming from the association agreement. And if there is no conflict, we would wholeheartedly support our partners to be a part of your specific policies you have in the customs union. And the point number three, we told the Russian government, let's not forget the big picture. And the big picture is the relationship between the European Union on one side and what was still at that time customs union, and now it's a Euro-Asian Economic Union. We told them, listen, each of us is building its own regulatory framework, rules, principles, and so on. We have to be very careful about this issue, because the more diverge we are in setting this regulatory framework, the more difficult it would be for us to trade, to cooperate, but even more so under the bigger pressure we put our shared neighborhood and our neighbors. And we would rather avoid that. And we offered the Russian government in 2013 some kind of pilot project on a specific policy areas to develop the same regulatory framework. And I remember a pause before Prime Minister Medvedev replied, and after 2 seconds he said, oh, it's very interesting. The next point on our agenda was this and that, and we have never been able to come back to those issues. So whatever you see today, it's not some kind of result of a plot there, or some kind of hidden policy, or something, as Reinhard were trying to prove, or something being done from the very beginning against the interest of the Russian people and even the Russian elites. But it's nevertheless, of course, very sad that it came to this stage.
Thank you very much for this insight.
I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I referred to a quote in my first statement, but I didn't really tell you what to look for. 10th of December, 2004, the press conference, Putin and Spanish Prime Minister Zapatero. Please, okay? Kremlin webpage. Thank you.
Still online, apparently. Reinhard, I think now it's the obvious question for you. You have always been a fervent advocate of dialogue with Russia, despite the rising distrust in the last couple of years. Now, within 2 weeks, the situation has changed dramatically. You were surprised as everybody else. The West and Russia are almost in an economic war. There's no trust left. Even if this war ends in the next few weeks or months, is there any room for serious dialogue and cooperation between the EU and Russia in the next couple of years? And if yes, which areas of cooperation do you see?
First of all, I would point out that we all failed to have a decent European security architecture. We failed. We can blame Russia, and clearly if you have a war against a country which has not even the closest intention to be aggressive against Russia, it's hard to see that to main parts it was Russia who did this. But I just want to make the point that, you know, we are all no innocent bystanders. What we have is what we have, and unfortunately, maybe we should have tried harder. I would like to point out, I'm a historian, so I always go back in history, and sometimes it's enlightening and sometimes not, so I hope tonight it is enlightening. 1975, that's the year of the KSCE final Helsinki Charter, the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's a big thing. 1975, an advisor to Kennedy, a high-ranking advisor to Kennedy, who then worked at the State Department in the US, said, how do we make sure to bring into an equilibrium the security interests of the Soviet Union and the security interests of Eastern Europe? And at the time, he meant Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. 1975. And we are still standing there. We cannot bring this together, with horrible results, as we see. I mean, we can use all kinds of words. A war is a war, and that is just terrible. So, yes, I think Social Democrats have this tendency to always think we have to talk. And I don't think anybody should blame us for that. But at the same time, now things have changed. So now, clearly, it's not really the time to have super talks or anything. It's the time to make sure that somehow we get peace in Ukraine first, and second, that Russia will be contained. You know, containment is something which we know from the 50s and 60s, and we're coming back to that, containment. And if we have a stable status quo, which we don't have, we have a transition, we don't know what kind of, you know, what's the foundation for anything tomorrow, after tomorrow, we just don't know. When we don't have a stable status quo, it's extremely difficult to have any talks, except, of course, working on for a ceasefire and working to have possibly even a period of peace, which then hopefully went into a stadium of longer peace. But what I have said before, the unclearness of security in the countries which are geographically between the EU and Russia will continue. These 6 countries I mentioned at the beginning have different hopes. 3 of them, as Mr. FÜLE has said, have signed the association agreement. You have Armenia, which have signed something on a much lower scale, but still. And you have Belarus, which is not interested anymore in getting closer to the EU. And you have Azerbaijan, which is trying to be neutral in any way. So one scenario could be that we're in for this for decades. You know, usually we think, yeah, a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months. In 2008, we had an agreement, a ceasefire fairly quickly. After Donbass and the annexation of Crimea, there was a stable status quo, which at least brought 8 years of peace. But this one can be, though, for the long run. To tell the truth, I have no idea. What happened is so severe on every aspect. The financial crisis, which will hit Russia and is already hitting Russia, I don't think anybody who's supporting these sanctions will say, oops, we'll take it away. Even though that should be, of course, a talk. Russia does that, will reduce the financial economic pressure. But I think Russia really has united the EU in a way nobody else could have done that, and NATO too. But still, at least trying to answer your question, we should not forget communication. We had this discussion during the day. Maybe dialogue is just not the right word anymore. Maybe dialogue is a word which has been used too many times. You could use conversation. You could use communication. We should keep in contact with Russian people in Russia who are in disarray. They really don't know what to do about themselves and the country, their country. We should not cut all those contacts. We should not go back what we have seen in during the Cold War. Don't forget, there was no civil society to talk to. We had Mr. Solzhenitsyn at one point getting out of the country. And to tell you the truth, Solzhenitsyn is one of the architects, the thinking architects of what Mr. Putin is referring to, bigger Russia. A dissident, somebody who really hated the Soviet Union, came up with this plan to have the bigger Russia, which is Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and the northern part of Kazakhstan. He is the mind behind this. I mean, think about it. So the communication with Russians have to continue on all levels. But really, it is hard to imagine having a meaningful dialogue, as we call that, with a government which consists of people who say things like, we haven't invaded Ukraine, or we would like to get rid of fascists and other people, a country which is led by a Jewish guy, comedian, still having kind of humor even now. So I want to finish this. So Russia is acting as a country they always criticized. Russia is invading a different country, even though this country is posing no threat whatsoever. And Ukraine is playing the Russian part, the country which is usually, I mean, you know, we're talking about Napoleon, Hitler, being invaded. So this is so crazy and so weird, which doesn't really help if I comment on this, the Ukrainian people, but it's so weird that we have to come to terms with this. And just to go back and talk to the government will be, I think for any politician, we have a couple of here on the podium, extremely painful. But I would still argue, if you have to do this, you have to do this. And if Mr. Zelensky wants to talk, and I don't think he really has an option to do that, he should do this. But I don't see any example we had in the past to do this, because when Germany was defeated in 1945, it was defeated, that was the end of it. I cannot foresee this for Russia at the moment, and it is something which we always keep in mind. Russia is not going away. Russia will not change its postal address. So somehow we have to come back to talk. The first one will be to make sure the escalation is going down, but any further idea about a European security with Russia is not thinkable at the moment, I have to say, which is tough. For those people who have dealt with Russia and the Soviet Union for the longest time. And my generation has seen things coming up. I served in the German army, if I may say this, in 1981. That was around the Polish crisis, Solidarność. From then on, apart from the stationing of the ballistic missiles in Germany, it went up. 1989, 90, I don't have to tell you all this. And then from, I don't know if it is 2008, maybe it was 2007, maybe it was before, it's going down. And now it's going steep downhill. And I don't know if we have seen the bottom of it all. And to change gears and come up with ideas, that's tough. I want to finish with the German politicians, you know, Egon Bahr, and we should not we should not make the mistake to say, we need him again. He was good for the time being. It's something different now. But what he did is he wrote in 1965 I don't know what it is, a paper we would say, I guess, with the title, What Now? So I think maybe this panel, maybe Social Democrats should come up with something, what now? And he said, and this is when I really want to finish, he says, we have to build some kind of European house, and the difficulty is we don't know how it will look like now, so we have to imagine. And I think that's what we have to do, imagine.
Imagine. So, thank you very much, Reinhard. There is the opportunity now also for the participants who are present at the Renner-Institut to ask questions. Bernhard is the first in the first row. Raoul is coming with the microphone.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I want to bring you back a little bit, from the long-term perspective, to the immediate perspective of the humanitarian catastrophe, that is going on in Ukraine, and that is increasingly going on around Ukraine. You were talking about the incredible solidarity that is extended to millions by now of Ukrainians crossing the border to Poland, and that is also true for other neighboring countries, and it is basically true for most of the European countries who have extended great humanitarian support to the Ukrainian people. And humanitarian assistance is usually understood as a short-term activity. Now, pretty much no matter how the war is continuing, and pretty much no matter how the political settlement after that war will look like, this humanitarian crisis will continue for years, many years. The UN estimates are 7 to 10 million people leaving Ukraine. And we're not talking about the 3 million Ukrainians who have already been internally displaced in 2014. So there is a massive, massive humanitarian crisis ongoing. And I'm not sure if we are prepared for the long haul. And Professor, you referred to some political groups in Poland who might use this situation also to stir up unrest and political opposition to the millions of Ukrainians who we will welcome in the neighboring countries and in the rest of Europe. These happen to be the same groups all over Europe who had old links to the Russian Federation and the ruling party in Russia. So we're in for some trouble here. That was my comment, that we will have to keep up that humanitarian effort no matter what the political developments will bring and the military developments will bring. My question, however, is a completely different one. You have talked about the Eastern Neighbourhood. I wonder what you think this development and the Russian aggression in Ukraine will do to the ambitions and the perspectives of our Western Balkan neighbors to join the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is somebody, yeah. Yeah, maybe you could introduce yourself because I know you came from Ukraine.
So good evening to everyone. My name is Dmitro. I represent SD Platform, organization from Ukraine. I wanted actually more to just reflect, not to ask a question, and to return back to 2014. So the situation when we first got a war actually on our territory. And I'm originally from Lugansk region, from the east of Ukraine. And I was that internally displaced person back to 2014. So had to pass through all of this, let's say, nightmare and madness that we have right now in the country. And these 8 years, they were passing in the way that we were still hoping that situation will be resolved somehow, and that eventually we will be able to return to our Ukrainian Lugansk and to Donetsk, respectively. Nobody was expecting, especially apart from the internally displaced persons, that this situation, this war, will break out as it is right now. And for internally displaced persons, I think it's a double burden right now to experience these situations that we've got, because people, they were trying to manage to survive during all these 8 years, because let's be honest, the support from the state side was not that much efficient or that much great, I mean, in terms of economic perspective and so on. And right now, all of these people, they have to flee. Like apparently it's mainly about women and kids right now. So they have to flee now abroad, and like without, I mean, any savings or like any material, let's say, stuff that would help them somehow to arrange their life abroad. And these people, I mean, we don't know like for how long it will last, right? But apparently it will last already for a long time, most probably, not for a short term. So the only things that I wanted just to recall upon is just to show solidarity as much as you can as European community to us in particular, because I was reflecting today already, like to some people that I'm aged 24 and I have to pass like through the second war right now, literally. And that's a feeling that I would actually never ever wish to experience to everyone, because it's literally just tough to pass through. So thank you for having opportunity to speak up.
Thank you very much for being with us today. You've been here during the conference as well, the whole day, which we appreciate a lot. Anybody else? Oh, there's an alarm going on. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, please.
Does any one of you have better knowledge about what is always talked about, that when the Soviet Union broke apart, that the West promised not to extend the military frontiers from the old existing NATO towards the eastern area? Does any one of you have an idea whether this was just a rumor coming up by the Russians, or whether this has some substance?
Thank you very much. I think this would be a good question just to answer for Reinhard very quickly, or Stefan, do you want to? The famous promise.
For my Western Balkans.
We do this after. Now we have a very, because I think it's an important question, because it's referred to like literally everywhere, the famous promise.
This has been researched by actually one American professor. She hit the jackpot. She just came out with the second book on that. So the answer to the question is there has been no written guarantees, nothing. But there have been talks, also controversial. I don't want to go too much in detail. We can do this after. Baker said something, the then Secretary of State of the US. Bush Sr. then changed it. There were talks with the Russians. Some German diplomats were interviewed recently on that. So there was an overall understanding there won't be any enlargement. But this was not decided, but talked about on the highest level, meaning not really asking those countries who would like to possibly be part of NATO. And I think the latest understanding of this all is that, so Russia has a point there, but on the other hand side, there is a different development. And I think this comes also from Poland, but not only, also from Germany. A kind of game changer was, that's the discussion right now, was the Chechen War. The first one from 94 to 96, and then later from 99 on. The way the Russian army moved into Chechnya, even though this is Russian territory, this is not a foreign territory, but the way they did it in such a way that, you know, that people say, historians say, they have never seen any destruction like that ever before. And I'm not saying that's the case, but, you know, it at least shows you what destruction. And I've been to that war as a correspondent, so I can tell you that was incredible. So the trust that I gave you the idea from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1994 changed because also Russia behaved differently. And out of this then came a fierce discussion within the State Department in general in the US, but also in Germany. And then there was the idea, okay, well, you know, if countries would like to join, then it's their decision, and that's what Kozyrev said. It's more complicated than that. You can say the first enlargement was kind of done with the Russians, and then they agreed to it. We have documents on that. The second enlargement is slightly different. That was then the Baltic countries. But it's too much, I think, into detail. So the question is, the answer is basically no written document, anything on that. The US professor, who is really the only one who really went into this and did work and dig and with all the documents you need, said the way it was done was not very good from the West. That was a huge mistake. They should have done this much better, communication and so on and so forth. But the fact that there was a NATO enlargement and countries wanted to have, you know, that's just how it is. It's mixed, as you can see.
Well, I see it a bit different and less complicated. When politicians meet, like any other people meet, they talk. And maybe they talk about also this, and they did talk about this. But if you want to have it fixed, you have a treaty, you have a contract, and you have negotiations about the formulation. And there's nothing like that. But there is a strong declaration with the agreement of Russia on recognizing the borders in Europe, the Budapest Declaration, the Paris Declaration. So I think, no, Russia has no point. If people explain something in a private talk, they can explain it. But if Russia wants to have something fixed, they have an agreement and they have to have demand a contract, a treaty. Even this treaty cannot be done on the heads of the others. This is the biggest difference, and Stefan also mentioned it before. We respect the will of the countries, and then of course you can discuss what is clever or is not clever. Russia has the opinion, they can decide, or Putin has the opinion, they can decide about the fate of the others. So I think all this talk about talk is nonsense. There is nothing here on the table which would prevent the membership. If I like it or not is another thing, to prevent the membership. But there's a lot on the table which prevents the violation of European borders by Russia.
Thank you very much. Western Balkans. There are two aspects, and there are also people online raising questions and posing questions on the Western Balkans. There are two aspects. First, the immediate crisis, which affects also the Western Balkans and also the debate there. Apparently there's been a crashed drone in Zagreb today, and also one participant writes that people in the Western Balkans are deeply concerned how the war will affect their region. So that's the first thing, the immediate crisis. And second, what about the future of the accession talks for now North Macedonia and Albania, but also others? Stefan FÜLE, please.
Again, let me continue. When my colleagues left it, I spent 4 years in NATO headquarters looking for any sort of kind of sign which might prevent my country to becoming a NATO member. I have not found anything, and I recall that actually at a certain time Gorbachev, when he was sort of recalling the memories from the discussion 2+2, he said the discussion was not necessarily about the membership as such, but as a military infrastructure of NATO, which is an important element. We were joining NATO after the founding act of NATO-Russia Council. We complained together with Poland and others to a certain extent when the negotiation between NATO headquarters in Moscow was about the various elements. I mean, be careful. I mean, we as a member to be we want to be a part of that rather than sort of negotiating above our heads on kind of NATO or arrangement we would be actually becoming a part of. And it's interesting because we, of course, at the end respected those negotiations. We respected the Founding Act to the point that during the accession negotiations of NATO, we have adopted a specific three no's policies as a unilateral step. We made a declaration that the Czech Republic does not have any plan, intention, and willingness to deploy on its territory nuclear weapons. And we said also that the Czech Republic has these three no's when it comes to the substantial military presence, a permanent presence of NATO. We made that commitment, okay? But then there was Crimea, Donbass. I mean, that has not changed, specifically the Czech position, but we understood and respected the worries of some of our Eastern and Central European partners or allies in NATO. And when came this huge buildup and open threat and even the invasion itself, no one should be surprised that with all due respect, by the way, the Russians have walked away from the NATO-Russia Council well before that. But we do not consider ourselves to be bound by this, feeling the threat to us. And it's interesting that the Russian policy is, you know, look, this is us reacting, you know, to the build-up on NATO eastern flanks, while all the facts sort of support our interpretation of the events. Now, I have a message to President Macron. Right? I mean, you're presiding over the European Council, okay? The France is now a presiding country of the European Council. Okay, stop talking to us and referring to the need of reforming the European Union and do something for it, finally, okay? The time has come for you to stop blah, 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 and the time has come for you to make some concrete steps in preparing the European Union to accept countries. For how long you want to wait for the people knocking on the door of the European Union? There are 6 Western Balkan countries in various stages of enlargement. You have Turkey still there. You have now 3 more Eastern partners applying for the European Union membership. Those are 10 countries. It's a blessing. It says something about our strengths, about our attractiveness, if there are countries who want to become a member. We cannot just tell them, you know, go away and come back in 10 years and 15 years, maybe we will sort of put our house in orders. I think we can do both things at the same time. To deepening the integration, going deeper, but at the same time enlarging it. Because there is one threat, a huge threat, that those countries will not be waiting longer. Maybe they will lose the interest. Maybe they will be persuaded by the third countries that there are more interesting alternatives to their integration aspirations. Why should we give up on the most powerful transformation instrument we have? Enlargement. Look at my country, look at Poland, look at Slovakia, Baltic countries, Croatia. Within a relatively short period of the time, you know, getting rid of the totalitarian memories and the experience with a certain sort of mismatch here and there. But that's a huge success of the European Union to put away the Iron Curtain and enlarge by more than 10 Central and Eastern European countries, followed by Bulgaria and Romania then. So the message to the first answer is yes, I do realize a need to have a very serious reflection on where we are on the decision-making process, our policies, and what needs to be changed, that we could bring new members. We're talking about Turkey, we're talking about Ukraine. Those are no small countries. I'm not saying that all of them would necessarily become members. I'm talking about. Okay, I'll stop here. And we need to do our homework, but at the same time, we need to open up and start the serious dialogue with them. So my message to Macron is, I mean, stop making this general plea and do something for that. You have all the instruments you need. Plus, I'm also lobbying for some kind of recognition, because enlargement is a long process. Even if we really do our best to help those countries to reflect on the EU acquis, and it's more than just new laws and new institutions. It's a thinking. This is the most important one. So I'm advocating for creating some kind of additional institutional framework, platform, whatever it's called, where we would unite with all those countries who are sort of in the waiting room, but with whom we could cooperate on the equal footing, without questioning the EU competences, and in harmony with the European Union. We need to offer Ukraine, Serbia, Montenegro, at the time as before sort of become the full-fledged member, to have the possibility also to talk about the challenges and to overcome them, not in the framework where it will be us, the European Union, on the higher ground and telling them what to do and how to behave, but on an equal footing as a real equal partners.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka.
Just 5 seconds. Not about Balkans, but it's regarding the first question. I strongly recommend you to find in YouTube the last interview with Dmitry Muratov. He's the editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta, the last one who is purely democratic and very liberal. This is the pillar of the opposition. And that one was recently closed, maybe not closed, but they decided not to let's say, risk the life of their journalists. But Dmitry Muratov gave an interview, a long one, this is 90 minutes, but very moving and very openly explaining what is the mindset of President Putin, why he was disappointed with the West, what was that breaking moment when he decided to not to cooperate with the West, but to leave the West. When he, it was not Munich only. It was not just Munich conference in 2007, but even before. And he's really, this is the best explanation of what's going on now and what are the roots of today's war against Ukraine. I really strongly recommend. It's easily to find in YouTube. The last one, the last interview with Dmitry Muratov, I do not remember the title, I'm sorry. No. Dmitry Muratov, he's an editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta. Novaya, this is not Nezavisimiya. This is that one, he was, that, as you remember, prize, yes, Nobel Prize. Yes. This is the same, yeah. Yeah, so really it's easy to find, and this is really the best interview to give us explanation what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Hannes Swoboda has also pretty much to say about the Western Balkans, as you are have also with your institute, and we also have a project together concerning the Western Balkans. Please, what's your assessment?
Yeah, thank you.
And this would be the finish.
Yes. Anyway, I have to go to the airport because I fly to Serbia still tonight. First, perhaps a remark to why I reacted so strongly also on this Putin case, and it's in connection with what you said. Because very often it is used as an excuse. Yeah, we have made the mistake and we extended the European Union and extended NATO, and if we wouldn't have done it, it would have been different. And I think we have to break this kind of argument, whatever has been the one or the other person said. Also on Ukraine, I very often met, I met some days, it was less than a week, before Yanukovych, on the pressure of Russia, said no to the association agreement, Kluyev, who was the main negotiator, and he said, no, we go forward. There was a strong will, but then came the Russian intervention and the threat, and then it was blocked. So I think we have to recognize these facts. Now, going to the Western Balkans, I fully agree. And by the way, it was ŠTEFAN FÜLE who was the commissioner, and I was the rapporteur for Croatia. So we worked closely together on the last enlargement, which was happening not only from the Western Balkans, but in general, and a long time ago, yes. And as things, of course, many of these countries made mistakes. And there was North Macedonia who was not ready for, it was called Macedonia, it was called FYROM, a strange name, was not ready to come to an agreement with Greece for a long time. Then finally it made the step forward, not an easy step in changing the name of your country. I don't know which country would be ready to change the name. And what happened? Still nothing. And then came in Bulgaria. But of course, Bulgaria, what can we say to Bulgaria if France for a long time blocked any opening of the negotiations with North Macedonia or with Albania? So I think it is very important. I was in Bosnia 2 or 3 months ago, very critical situation, with Dodik, being the strong man and maybe even stronger now, feeling stronger like Popper the Sailor now after what Russia did in Ukraine. And we have to be strong. And I'm very happy that the forces in Bosnia were strengthened recently. And also very happy that the German foreign minister, again, is also active and paid a visit to these countries now, with all the burden from Ukraine. But we must clearly send a message to these countries. We don't forget, and it does not mean that when we now support Ukraine and Ukraine's aspiration, that Ukraine comes first. But it would mean, and that is what also Stefan said, we need some sort of a platform or some sort of an institutional framework where all these countries can be part of the family already now, not of course in the core family, but every family has a core family, but has other relatives around who are not so strongly yet part of the family, but can move upwards according to the measure they do. So I think I'm very happy that, and I had there was a meeting with the foreign minister of Austria, very happy that Austria is sticking to the priority for the region, that Germany is now also on that line, and I would hope, you know, that France finally also get to that line, maybe even after the election, because all these kind of excuses and elements, yeah, that we have people from Kosovo and so on. If you look now what we have on refugees from Ukraine, what are the small number of Kosovo people who are perhaps misusing the non-existing visa liberalization anyway. So even here, again, visa liberalization, Kosovo fulfilled 98% of its obligation, and still the European Union, means the Council, not the Commission, but the Council is failing to fulfill their promises. So I hope that this strengthening of the European Union now, because of the terrible Ukraine crisis, is giving off some new inputs in that direction. And we as Austrians, I think we will especially underline the fact that with all the attention going now to Ukraine and of course to Moldova, by the way, Moldova, fortunately it's now also on the media in Europe, or at least in Austria, in relation to the population, Moldova now has the biggest negative impact because of the refugees, or the biggest costs also to bear because of the refugee number. So we should not forget the small countries who bear a strong burden. And Moldova still has a territory where there are Russian troops in Transnistria. So it's very close to Odessa. So when there is an immediate danger, it is, for example, also Moldavia. So I think we should think about European-wise, and European-wise means not only about our situation now, but about our friends and our countries who are struggling to also go the European way, as Moldova did in the last year or so, because if, and I can only repeat what Agnieszka says, if Russia is successful, it will be a disaster. The only element we have to think about is, unfortunately, what is the way out for Putin? Because if Putin, and that's true for all the dictators and people like him, if Putin doesn't find any way out, he may go even, you know, to the nuclear issue, and that would be, of course, a disaster. So to find this small line between not accepting what Putin does, but not going in the way to leave him only in his logic, the nuclear issue, the nuclear way to demonstrate his power will be the biggest task the European Union and NATO and the US have to fulfill in the coming weeks.
Thank you very much, Hannes Swoboda, for your closing remarks. Thank you very much to all the panelists for your expertise and sharing your insights with us. It was a real privilege for us to have you here. The Karl-Renner-Institut will continue the debate about security politics with a discussion we are organizing this Thursday on the Austrian neutrality and how to find or further develop a social democratic approach to the Austrian neutrality. Thank you to the audience here live in our institute, but also to those who followed us on Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom. We appreciate your interest very much. This video will remain available on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you again to all our partners, especially the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, but also to the other foundations that are part of this project concerning EU-Russia relations. Amicus Europae, Fondation Jean Jaurès, Foundation Max van der Stoel, Fondazione Gramsci, and Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. Thank you also very much to the company Medienwerk for the technical support during the whole day, which was really excellent, like always. We very much hope to see you again at our next event. Have a good evening.